And what is the message that Indigenous peoples from around the world bring to this conference?
You know, it's an interesting question because indigenous peoples come from the rich biodiversity that's endangered. The biodiversity I'm talking about represents about 80% of this world. And we're talking about cultural diversity as well. Indigenous peoples represent 60% of the cultural diversity of this world. And in addition to biodiversity being an endangered species, our indigenous peoples are an endangered species. So one of the big issues that were brought up 20 years ago was how do we protect endangered species? That was the establishment of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. But one thing that was really left out in this equation is how do we, as civil society, as indigenous peoples, and how do we put political pressure on the world leaders to develop mechanisms that protect the rights of indigenous peoples. We should not have to be in a situation where our people, like here in Brazil, our brothers and sisters of the South, are fighting for the protection of the ecosystem, the water system, and fighting against the Bello mine, the hydro dam. And they should not be in that situation. In Peru, there's gold mining. People are dying from contamination of water. From the tar sands in Canada, we're having a situation where there are cancer clusters. Our people are suffering from the toxic contamination of the most polluting industry development that I've seen in my whole life, and I've been throughout the world. In Alaska, we've got offshore oil drilling about ready to take place. Big corporations have power, and now they're starting to create this new image of green economy, green energy, green engineering. But we see beneath that as indigenous people, because we live on that front line of struggle. Let's look at this Belamonte hydro dam. We are familiar with that in the north. There's similarities with our Cree people in the James Bay and Manitoba areas, where these large dam has completely flooded out and devastated not only the land and the culture that goes with it, but these sacred sites that go with it. So what we are here doing as indigenous people is to strengthen and reaffirm our resistance to fight for the survival of our people. We have a right to live. And in a lot of these popular movements and social movements, and a lot of the friends here, they say that they're fighting for a better world. They want to make a better world possible. And I remember one of the elders from the Amazon, he said, the world that they want is my world. But at the same time, we got corporations coming into these territories, logging, illegal logging, mining, and now we have our food that is poisoned. And now we're dealing with food security issues. So we're joining forces with NGOs fighting for food sovereignty. But if we don't have access to clean water and safe food for our people, then the government is going to remove us to the city areas. And with that, they have assimilation processes that just move us away from our homelands, and that gives permission for corporations to come into our land. That's why we are fighting here. But one of the biggest message that our indigenous peoples want to tell the listeners is that there's something happening, and it's a product of industrialized society that has removed all people from Mother Earth, so that the identification that humanity has no more roots in that unique, profound spiritual relationship all humans have with Mother Earth. With indigenous peoples, that is still there through our language, through our prayers, our ceremonies, through our way of life. If we are removed from that, if civil society and the governments of the world and the corporations remove us from that, we're going to lose that consciousness as all human beings. So that's why we need the help of the civil society. We need the help of common people to look deep within their heart and their mind at government policies that are becoming privatized. What we are fighting here is a privatization of nature. We are fighting the commodification of the sacred. Who owns nature? The way that the system is developing, it will be corporations own nature. Already they own seeds. They even own the DNA and the genes. We're dealing with the situation as a solution to the climate crisis is a carbon market scenario that allows the polluter to get rich. We should be in a situation where the polluter pays. That is not part of the equation in green economy and economic globalization. It's where the energy companies are getting rich, while the local people suffer from contamination, oil spills, contamination of our fish. We're losing our traditional natural indigenous fish in the oceans. What's happening as a result of that, since throughout the world we depend on food, is now they're experimenting with genetically modified fish, aquaculture, fish farms, artificial food systems. We don't even know what we eat, not only as indigenous peoples, but we are that go to grocery stores, but all people that go to grocery stores, you don't know what you eat. We have a right to know. So there's a similarity that's emerging here between the struggle of our rights as indigenous peoples and the rights of all people. We're going to be in that same boat together. We have to put a stop to this corporate control that has no accountability, no transparency to the common people of the world. We have to wake up. We only have one Mother Earth, and that's why we are here, to defend the sacredness of Mother Earth, defend the rights of all people, to defend the rights of our people. We should have a governance structure throughout the world that is addressing these three pillars we're talking about here: economic prosperity, social inclusion, and environmental protection. We have to be involved as indigenous peoples, the small farmers, the peasants, the rubber tappers out in the forest, the fisher people, all people, from the cities to the rural areas. But as indigenous peoples, we are also asking for a fourth pillar, that culture has to be a pillar. Everybody has a culture. As indigenous people, our culture has been under attack. And I believe it's because we have a deep, profound spiritual relationship with the earth. They cannot just remove us. So that's why they've been trying to destroy the way that we pray, destroy our sacred sites. It's all connected.
Is that spiritual bond with the earth and those links that you're forming with other civil groups, is that going to be strong enough to fight the greed of the big corporations? It does seem as though many groups are speaking as one on this issue. The evidence is incontroversial. We know the evidence. Nobody debates it. Yet the big corporate greed and the big governments seem to be having the upper hand at the moment. Seem to have the louder voice.
During the past 4 years, we've been participating strategically in our work as an indigenous nonprofit organization working on the environment and building a network, not only as a network as indigenous peoples, but a network of popular movements. And through that network, we've been educating ourselves to the reality of what's happening. So part of this global movement, we've been educating farmers, workers, women, youth. We've been mobilizing to expose this deception that's going on. Is that free trade is part of that capitalism dream of corporations like Shell, pharmaceutical corporations, agricultural corporations, plastics corporations, toxic chemical corporations. And that's where we need to have a new system of democracy, a global democracy. We need to look at the framework as we move forward from here. And it's ironic that I think that what I'm seeing here in the past couple of days is that we have been successful as civil society, as activists, as indigenous peoples, as workers, as small farmers, is that we lifted up this issue from the People's Summit, which is an alternative to the United Nations meeting here, this Earth Summit, to our indigenous gatherings like at Carioca, is that we've been mobilizing and we lifted this up. A green economy is based upon capitalism of nature, privatization of nature, and people mobilized and spoke up strong, resisting that. In the past couple of days, the governments started to back away from that terminology and said, let's work on at least a commitment on sustainable development goals. So where we are at as Indigenous peoples is that we're not going away. In fact, being here and meeting with our brothers and sisters from the north to the south, from the west to the east, in fact, it has built, our commitment to resist. And that sustainable development has to take into consideration culture, but it also has to take into consideration as part of a new paradigm, looking at the rights of Mother Earth, so that Mother Earth has jurisprudence as an alternative to a property law construct that is so large, so vast, that it almost seems impossible to confront. But we as people standing together, the listeners, Indigenous people, to wake up, is that we can change this. We can make a change. We did it here to where the government is backing away from green economy. Does that mean they're gonna put it on the shelf? No, because they've been working on this. It's ingrained. It's in the framework of capitalism. It's in the framework of It's in the framework of economic globalization, free trade. So we are looking for fair trade, to where we can pay the farmers, we can pay the workers. These are struggles that Brazilians have worked on, is the workers' rights and the struggles of the landless peoples. And so all we are asking as Indigenous peoples is that we start to work together. We're in the same canoe, you could say we're in the same boat together. But in that reality is that we have to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples. And we have to have systems that protect. Put pressure on your government to adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are many of the few things. And we have to also educate ourselves on what's happening on the national and the international level on addressing climate change and global warming. There's a big monster coming our way. The climate will continue to get hot in some areas it's going to get cold. The weather patterns are going to be unpredictable. Our elders, our spiritual leaders told us about this. That's why we are now demanding real solutions, not false solutions. Using a carbon market as a solution to mitigate climate change is a false solution. It just allows the polluter of the north to continue to expand and to get rich. It allows them to buy cheap carbon credits, carbon certificates in the global south where the currency is cheaper. And what they do is that they use the carbon trading as a way to offset, like balance the pollution that they're creating by conserving trees in the south that hold carbon. But the science of this does not make sense. What it does is create a toxic hotspot for a local Indigenous community, our local community that's receiving the increase of toxic pollution dropping down on their local community with no accountability. And they're saying, I offset the damage that I'm doing here. I offset the concentration of greenhouse gases that comes out of my smokestack by participating in carbon offsets, carbon trading. That's why we have to look deep in these solutions that corporates are behind, that the World Bank is behind, and we got to wake up. We only have one Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much.